because I had never used it professionally until I joined the team over at DFRIP. But they use it almost exclusively for configuration management. Almost. Those things that you can't manage with Puppet, you know, there's other tools you gotta use. Yeah, Ansible, Puppet Bolt.
Puppet what?
Bolt. I'll go over it.
Okay, all right.
So I played with it for 4 years. And, you know, doing whatever learning they've got more recent, like, oh, that version's come out. Well, let me guess I'm going to go and see what that's all about, but never really used it. Any more than I think I use Puppet Apply at the on my laptop to kind of rebuild it or to try and come up with, hey, you know, let's make it easy for me to rebuild, because I'm one of those distro hoppers. I'll go and reload something in a moment. And I usually try to avoid that because it's such a hassle to get things set up. But
Yeah, Delta, years ago, we were looking at Puppet or CF Engine. I advocated Puppet, but we went with CF Engine in the end. And at this point, we're pretty much getting away from it. We went with Salt for a while, and our new OpenStack stuff was basically Bash.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who. I didn't realize you guys had used Salt at all.
I haven't heard of it much in the last 3-4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I
It
mean,
was listed as one of the ones, but in the last 3 or 4 years, I hadn't really heard a lot about it.
Yeah.
Even on the, hey, compared Puppet to Chef to Ansible. That's usually the three you hear about. So interesting you say Bash, because Puppet Bolt could help you with that.
Yeah.
Yes, it could.
I'll wait until I ask questions.
Yeah, what time is it?
Give me just a second. I just realized that for
So-
some reason this the software was doing some weird framing of your window, so kind of manually.
So if anybody wants to
inviginating.
install a Puppet server locally on their system, you know, I'll give you the commands real quick if you want them, but it's pretty easy to go to their website on the documents and just installing Puppet. They walk you through a quick setup, and it's not hard to get started on it. One of the biggest thing is you sort of have to have DNS resolution.
Okay, pretty common.
Well, but like when you're demoing, and like I've got cloud servers that don't cost me anything more than my training package with Linux Academy, but they're ephemeral. So they'll shut themselves down if you're not using them because they save costs, and I don't mind. They're just there for me to monkey around with. And then when you start them back up, they will come up with a new IP. Now they have the same domain name, so as long as you use those, you know, generic cloud server usernames, use generic cloud servers host names that they give you, then that's fine. You can make a list of them and you'd be able to do it. But Puppet likes to be called Puppet. Makes it easier. If the cert kind of believes that it's named Puppet, you can get around that and you can force it to use a different name. But in the interest of time savings, I just edited the host file so that Puppet will be Puppet versus Joe Ryan 1C Cloud MyLab server dot. You know.
Yeah.
So.
All right, you about ready?
Sure.
Okay, I'll go ahead and read our sponsor thing. So the pizza tonight was provided by A2 Hosting. And A2 Hosting is a web hosting company based out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, with data centers across the globe. At A2 Hosting, they specialize in performance-based hosting for everyone with a proactive service team working around the clock. Whether you've never run a website before or are a professional developer, rest assured they have a web servicing or web hosting solution to meet your unique needs. So thank you to A2 Hosting for the delicious pizza.
All right. I'm Joe Ryan, but we've got a lot of new faces, so I'll let everybody introduce themselves, and then we'll come back to me and we'll get started. Let's start on that side, because then we'll end over here.
My name is Mike Flaga. I work with Transaction Network Services as a systems, director of systems for a lot of, lots of embedded Linux devices.
Hi, my name is Yash Advali. I work with Delta Dental. I'm a developer, software developer. Just trying to get a feel for DevOps.
All right.
And this is Ankush. I work with Supreme Court as a database administrator in their operations team. With Brandon sometimes in DevOps work.
Russ Vandermeer, I work at Delta Dental, and I'm on the DevOps team.
So, Brendan Thede, I'm a DevOps engineer at Supreme Court, and I get to work with Ankush, and we play around in Azure a lot.
So I'm Joe Ryan. I'm a systems and automation engineer / jack of all trades. So I've been a network engineer. I pretended to be a developer, but never got paid for it. So, and I work for the facility for rare isotope beams at MSU, managing Linux systems and that host the high-level controls and the low-level controls for the particle accelerator there and the associated infrastructure there. So we make it a point, we use Puppet in our environment, and we make it a point that everything should be able to be destroyed and rebuilt from scratch simply based on the code that's in our Puppet repositories. So that if all of the systems disappeared, we would have to get data backups, but that would be it. I mean, we do other backups too, but should all else fail, we rebuild from the Puppet code. And one of my goals is when I'm bringing up a new system that hasn't been installed yet, I'll actually go through it's installed, not anymore, and run it through again from scratch to see that the Puppet all runs cleanly, and that it installs a full system with all the configuration that's needed. So that's how we manage it, and that's my technique, is to destroy servers regularly, because hey. I'm going to talk about the levels of Puppet automation, because there really are multiple levels of the Puppet ecosystem, from just using a single laptop as the Puppet management to multiple servers. I won't really go into some of the really large scale things. That's another talk altogether. I'll go over for installing and running Puppet. I'll talk about the modules, manifest, and Hyra, and what those parts are, how you can scale it, and some of the challenges you'll have with different thought processes on scaling it. And then I got a list of resources everybody can look at if they want more. So you really do have a couple. You got single run options where it's run on demand. One of which is Puppet Bolt. You can actually run a Puppet server / agent combination on a node and just do Puppet apply against itself. So it's a one-time run. You can actually apply it against other nodes, but it is a one-time run. It doesn't run as a daemon and check in with the server every so often. And then you run in a Puppet agent that talks to master. So there's a Puppet master server that the agents check in with on a regular recurring basis. So if somebody changes something on this device, on the system itself, it'll go back and it'll go, yeah, I shouldn't look like that, and it'll change it. The best way to set them up, and what you should try to strive for, is that if a configuration changes, that it notifies the service that it needs to restart and comes up with a new configuration. Sometimes it's hard to make sure that happens, but you can tell it that this file notifies that service, and then the service will do a restart based on that. So with that continuous regular configuration management, there's both the open source Puppet server and then the enterprise edition. The enterprise edition comes with some extra nice little tweaks, and then support, of course. But open source will work just fine for nearly all environments. It makes it easier to set up the Puppet database to see the reporting, but you can do that with Puppet open source also. So then you get into, how do you lay out that repository? Do you use a single Puppet repository that all your code's in, modules, all the node definitions, or do you use R10K, which is really a large scaling option? You have a R10K repository that keeps a track of what modules should be installed, and then that's how it builds up the entire environment for each environment that you might have. So Puppet Bolt, it's simple installation with a package manager, gem, and you can put it on Windows, Mac, or Linux. They're pretty simple commands. Bolt.help is always the place to start. And then it's bolt command run. You tell it which nodes you want to run on, whether you need to run it as root, if you need a special user to run it, or if you need to use a special user to log in. If you want to pass the password and the sudo password at the command line, you can. And then you can do file uploads. Then you move on to, you can create tasks, which you can find in Forge, so you don't have to write every one of them, but they're sort of single actions in any language that runs on the destination node. Bash, PowerShell, Ruby, theoretically Java, but I don't know if you want to spin up a Java virtual machine to configure things on your system. Usually those are nice and sandbox, but theoretically any language that runs on the system, you can run a bolt task against. And then, go ahead.
So I was just curious, there's as root and there's user. What happens if would you use both?
So you might.
Okay.
So say I have a local account on this machine, but I have a sudo privileged account that I use to log into other machines to do configuration on, but they're sudos, can't log in as root.
Right.
So I would log in as user whatever, as root,
Okay.
give
So
it
is
a
it
password. If I needed to pass sudo password, it could too.
just okay? So is it kind of prepending your commands with?
So it's
sudo,
like if
or-
if I SSH to a host, if I don't put any user in front of it, it'll just take whatever user I have.
Right. Right.
But if I could prepend it, SSH Joe at hostname.
Mhm.
It will do that. Bolt will do that if you give it the user flag.
Right, and then the as root, is that just kind
That's
of
doing sudo.
putting a sudo in front
Right.
of everything? Okay.
Right. It's basically
That's what I
elevating you
was.
sudo.
That's what I kind of thought it was doing, but I just
Yeah.
wanted to kind of.
And you can run it under keys as well. You don't have to use passwords preferences to use key-based authentication, but in my scenario, I'm not going through all that. So tasks are those single actions, one action, whereas a plan would be a number of actions all grouped together. So, the web server might need to have, the Apache, it might need to have PHP, it might need to have a Git repository pulled in, it might need to have, some Python scripts installed on it. Each one of those would be a task, but you'd want to group them all together in a plan to kind of consolidate all into one location. And then it's just bolt task plan run, whatever it is, although you do have to, they're maintained in modules, so you do have to kind of tell it the full path for it.
Are the tasks just arbitrary commands?
They're arbitrary commands or a series of commands as well.
Are they native they have to be in the language that's supported by the native target?
Yes.
Natively by the target?
They're in a language supported by the target,
So
but
you wouldn't send bash, you wouldn't make a bash task script and send it to a Windows language?
correct.
Okay.
But you might, make a Python task, and if all of your nodes, Windows, Linux, Mac, had Python, then you could run it against all of them. So that's one of those things you kind of have to think about as, what language am I going to do it in, that I want it to run on all the nodes I have to run it on. So Puppet Apply is kind of, it's a single run. It runs as a task in the foreground as the user that executed it, as opposed to running as the Puppet user when the agent is running as a daemon. It uses the same modules and manifests that are on the server, but you do have to pass it a main manifest. It won't pick up the main manifest. And you just apply whatever manifest you want to whatever node you want to. It is run from the server, but it's kind of a single shot. You don't have to have the agents running on everything. You can run it from the server. So you don't have to have the agents running as a daemon. You can just do one-shot configures with Puppet as well.
So is Bolt an actual client to a server agent in the background?
Bolt is a local system. So Ansible, I'd install Ansible or Puppet Bolt on my laptop. Then I would use it on my laptop to go out and configure things. Whereas Puppet has to have a server available and an agent on the node. So even when you say Puppet apply a manifest to a node, you're still expecting that agent to be able to do all the parts that it needs to and cache the catalog on it. whereas Bolt is more of a agentless actor.
Oh,
So I can configure anything that accepts an SSH, WinRM I think is the other one, connection, then Bolt can actually manage it with whatever native languages are available on
and
that.
the key there was that Bolt is a client agent free
Right.
target. So so it just literally goes out to the target remotely, does its shut function, comes back. Where Puppet Apply creates the package, sends it over to Puppet Client.
Right. The
Target
agent is
side.
expected to be over there running on the client,
Okay.
on the client node to do those configuration items.
So the script or the story or whatever you're gonna call it in Apply is probably gonna be more abstract towards that of Puppet as opposed to the native scripting language?
Well, the manifest usually includes your node, and it's going to be in Puppet, the Puppet language, Ruby-esque. It's going to be in that, and it might use some underlying, you might run an exec on it to use Bash or PowerShell, but it's expected to be written in that Puppet,
That
Ruby-esque. I mean, it's the Puppy DSL, but it's based on Ruby. So it was written to be a domain language that is a superset of Ruby. So it really is Ruby, but it's sort of, it has its own functions that you're expected to use to do it.
Puppet's been around for a very long time. I thought before Ruby, so was it refactored into Ruby?
Oh, I don't think it was out before Ruby.
Okay.
I'd have to look at that, and I'd be perfectly willing to
I seem
Google
to
later.
remember like 5-10 years ago I saw.
Oh, Ruby's been out for 15 years, isn't it?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Ruby's been out for quite a while,
Yeah.
at least 10.
Okay.
That I know of. So, like I said, Puppet Apply is a way to do that one-shot configuration, but it's still using that server agent kind of paradigm. You're still expected to have that agent.
But as you mentioned, it's not using a daemon though, it's just literally going
Right.
to the target agent.
Right, that agent isn't actually running constantly and going, oh, it's been 30 minutes, I should check into the Puppet server. So that part isn't happening.
But it does require that agent to be installed and running. doesn't it?
Yeah.
It requires that agent to be installed.
And it's not
Don't
a server.
believe it has to be running as a daemon.
Because it'll poke it.
Right.
So
That's my understanding. I don't use
it'll
Puppet
put it
Apply
down
very
in the
often.
box and then trigger it to go run it.
Yeah, I don't use Puppet very often, or Puppet Apply very often, so it's sort of a weird.
To his question though, or to tag off, that might be out of turn though, but so the agent doesn't have to be running as a daemon in the background on the client or the remote host. So therefore, it's, I guess one thing I kind of heard a little bit, it almost sounded like the Puppet agents were checking in.
Yes.
Versus the
So-
Puppet daemon checking.
Well, if the Puppet agent is running in a normal Puppet agent server continuously managed configuration, the Puppet agent runs as a daemon. So it's running as a service on those systems constantly,
On those client targets.
on those target systems. And when they say, okay, I'm configured to check in every 30 minutes or every 2 hours or whatever the scheduled apply is, the agent will initiate that.
So they're sending up heartbeats and things like that.
Right. Well, they're saying,
Yeah.
it's been time, I better check in and see what catalog is. Do I need to make any changes? Okay, I'm done. So.
And I'm assuming then so that's more of a pull-based
Yes,
versus apply is push-based.
right. Right. Apply is more push-based, but it's not a recurring task. It's a single shot apply. Whereas, yeah, the normal Puppet agent master scenario is that the agent runs on all of the remote nodes, and when they see their time come up that they should check in, they check into the server.
And that's where the agent server doesn't need to know the destination of all the targets.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it needs to be aware of if it knows if it should configure a particular node, but the node will check in and go, hey, I'm, this node, here's my certificate. The server will go, yep, that's your certificate, here's your catalog, go ahead and apply it. And then the server goes on and does other things. It waits for a report back from the agent and saves that in its database for the reports. So it does report on what it did at the server.
On the agent, this probably is ahead of schedule, but you might get to it later. The agent connect, that heartbeat, that pull up, that agent pull, is that all self-inclusive or is that only a trigger so that the agent server knows to then open back down?
No, it's triggered on the remote node. So the remote
Yeah.
node contacts the server and
But if
says,
there is something in the catalog to do.
well, it's going to pull down the whole
It's gonna pull the
catalog.
whole thing
It's going to
down
say,
and
has it
stay in
changed?
socket.
Right, it's going to pull down the whole catalog if it's changed. So it's going to compile the catalog, pull it down, and then apply any changes that should not happen.
Where I'm getting at, and I apologize for being specific, is a lot of times I see devices that have firewalls between them. So the target, you don't know where the target is, because say it's out on the open internet behind an internet firewall block. And so they heartbeat in to the agent, to the server, get everything to pull it down and do their job. Where the
Right.
server doesn't know how to get to the.
Exactly.
or the
Your
target.
server doesn't need to be able to open a connection to
Great.
the remote nodes.
All right, that's.
The remote nodes need to be able to contact the
Yes.
server.
Okay,
So the server has to be accepting connections.
yeah.
From whoever needs to contact it. And then it's the server's responsibility to validate that that certificate matches, and it is proof by certificate. So the client will ensure that the server matches the certificate as expected, and then the server will also not provide a catalog unless the certificate matches what it's expecting from that named node.
Yeah, okay. So
And I'll show you the certificates and how you have to do it.
And that's how it's authenticating the individual.
Right, that's how the server knows that that node should get a configuration and what configuration it should get.
Cool.
So there are a couple of, just like that, you have to have the cert name, and pretty much that's the only setup I had to make, was adding the cert name equals puppet in the config file, and then it was running.
There's probably a nice tool or something to help make those certificate pairs.
They've got so if you want to do a self-signed certificate, and that's what I did, and I actually have a couple of VMs that I could spin up and go through the whole process. They do have a tool that generates a self-signed certificate. The agents will generate their own certificate and report into the server with it. Then the server is usually set to not respond until somebody goes in and looks at your certificates, validates that those are expected certificates, and signs them on the server.
And accept.
Right. Now you can set it to auto accept, like if you had 100 nodes that you knew were going to check in the next 10 minutes, maybe you would set that configuration item to auto accept, run all your nodes. Okay, turn it off, because otherwise you might have somebody check in with a bogus certificate.
But you still have to know what kind of story to send to it.
Right, the node name has to exist on the server unless there's a default. So you can have a default node that if somebody checks in and they don't have a host defined, they'll get the default configuration. So like I said, PuppetDB gives you that reporting. It is optional. You don't have to install it. It'll just throw out the catalog or throw out the reports when it's done. And then the Puppet agent, as I said, it runs on a schedule applying that catalog that's given to it from the master. So the agent checks in, give me my catalog, master provides it to them over that same TCP connection, and then it installs configuration changes. It does run on Linux, Windows, and Mac OS. I've never run it on Mac OS, but I've seen it run on Windows and Linux systems. So now we get down to big details. So the first thing is environments. Now Puppet has they changed to always provide environments, and basically it's different versions of the repository that it can use to apply, and each node can apply catalogs from a different environment as it's configured on the agent. So you can tell the agent, I want to apply the production environment, and the server knows that the production environment is here. It'll give you all the details out of the production environment. It knows that the staging environment is here, and if you say Puppet agent environment staging, that's the catalog you'll get. It will save that in the agent configuration for the next run it does. So on its regular run, it runs with whichever environment it configured itself for last. You can force it to change environments by telling it to run manually on a different environment. It does provide that isolation, and then they commonly store it in the Puppet Labs code environments. And then each one will be a directory named for the environment, and then it'll have the environment tree underneath that. Modules, manifests, and data. The manifests are agent specific, or node specific, or site specific. So those are where you define what a node should look like. It should have an Apache web server. maybe it's going to include the Apache profile, or it's just going to include the class Apache to get all the Apache configurations.
Is there the concept of like a role?
Yes,
No?
so
Okay.
you can use roles, and you can say that, you can have a web servers manifest
Right.
that says include role web server.
Right. Okay.
So it can use, so roles are a way to organize, every role needs these profiles. These profiles each need these particular classes or these particular files. So the concept normally is, and you can avoid roles if you want to, and just say, well, this node needs that profile, that profile. Normally you organize your module inclusions in a profile, and then you include profiles into a role. One difficulty is you can't declare a class multiple times. So if your profile calls the class and your role calls the class, it's going to have a collision and say, you declared it twice, I can't do that. If you call it an include, and that's why you usually include the profile which actually calls the class, the include can take multiple calls to a class and go,
Okay.
yep, all right, we're good. We only got one of those.
So if you had something that, I don't know, let's say you wanted to install something like a logging tool, you got some RC.
Right, we include it on the base. We could also include it somewhere else. And they wouldn't clash.
Let's say it's on, 3 of your 5 roles that you have. You would have it then would that be at a class level or a profile level? And then
So the
include-
distinction is really the resource. So if you're using a class resource to call that item and passing it configuration data, that's what you can only do once.
Okay.
When you do an include, you're just saying include profile Java. That's it.
Right.
I can only pass data to that for configuration through Hira data. And that is going to get pulled in by the class, and Hira has its own way of dealing with collisions in that. If you have multiple versions, you can tell it, I want a deep merge hash so that it gets a JSON blob. I want a first one, I want a, most significant one. There's some ways to manage the hierarchy is what they call it. So this is the highest priority, that's the lowest priority. If you say deep merge, then it's going to go, well, I'm going to get every one of those. So for example, a logging configuration. Well, maybe you want every one of those logging configurations, the site configuration, the network configuration, and the profile configuration.
Okay.
Well, you don't want to miss one of those, so you would do a deep hash, and then it would have, each entry would be one part of that, and the class has to be able to accommodate that there are multiple entries. They can use just basic resources. So like I could say package, Cause installed. Or I could say class Apache, if I have to provide any configuration items I could. Or I could say set all that up in a profile and just go, hey, for web server hosts, include profile Apache. Modules are that code that manages specific tasks. So usually a package installation, configuration, service enabling, and any other items that would have to be managed as part of that single task. So you'll have an Apache module. You'll have an NTP module. Whatever nice blob of stuff, you'd have a module for it. Some people write what would be in a module into the profile because, I just need a couple of things to manage that. I'm just putting in a little etcd server. I don't really want to create a module for it. I'm just going to put it all in a profile. So that's an option. You don't have to have modules. You could just use a profile, or you could put it directly in the node. And then so you can find them on Puppet Forge to kind of get that community involvement. Puppet Labs creates a lot of them. So they have a nice rating scale where you can see, does it meet Puppet code quality reports? Does it have tests? When was it last updated? What is the rating? How many packages do they have, or modules do they have in the Forge? And some of them are owned by Puppet. So Puppet Labs created them and they manage them. Hira is optional for plain text data or encrypted data lookup. So you can also put encrypted blobs in your code base so that you can keep the encrypted data in there, and it's it's actually diffable. You can see that it's changed. Now, you won't know how it's changed. You'll just know that, oh, that password's changed. Well, I don't know what that password is. I have to go decrypt it to get it. But that way you don't have to worry about, well, we have to maintain secrets outside of version control. You can maintain those secrets in there. And the way it works is Hira, they have a backend called eYAML, so it's encrypted YAML, on the Puppet server. You encrypt the data on the Puppet server, and then you add that encrypted blob to your Hira data, then it can be maintained in version control. So you can see when it changes, you can see the history of it. You can decrypt it on the Puppet server. Even if you don't have to have a copy of it on the Puppet server. You just say, hey, eYAML, decrypt blob, and it'll actually give you what that blob decrypts to. And it is used to separate the data from the actual code logic. It's not used as effectively in a lot of environments because it is more difficult to separate that data out, make sure that it gets looked up and inserted into the catalog. Sometimes it's easier just to put that data right in your manifest for the node. But I mean, configuration items, whether you want to, any parameters that a class could use could be put into Hira, and then it'll look them up. So the single repo, it is the simplest to manage because you just have one Git repo that's your Puppet. Each branch would be a separate environment on your Puppet server. The repository contains all of that module code. So when you do a Git pull of a repo, you've got the whole Puppet, modules, manifest, data, everything. It can be unwieldy in larger environments. If you want to update modules that have an upstream, you kind of have to pull them in, copy them over, because Puppet won't do recursive Git pulls. You could do embedded Git into your Puppet repo, but it's frowned upon to do those embedded Git pulls within there, and then it doesn't make it, and it's difficult to use multiple versions of the same module. So say I want to try out the new module version in one environment, without creating a branch and making the changes there, you can't really use two different versions. I'm going to show you an actual repo.
I just wanted to clarify, this is the actual running Puppet code itself on?
This is the modules, manifest, and data that would be compiled into the catalog for the agent. So let me show you a repo. And I guess I should open up my Visual Studio. So let me make sure I got the right one. So this would be the Puppet repository, a single repository. So you'd have your data, your manifest, which would be your node definitions, and then your modules, which is all the modules. So like I have an Apache module, apt, ClamAV, cron server. I think the only ones I got in there are Apache. So this is what an Apache module would have into it. But like I said, if that Apache module, I didn't write it. I went to Puppet Forge and got me an Apache module. Well, I had to copy that code from wherever I'm cloning it locally into my Puppet code, and then also push that up to my repository so that the Puppet server pulls that whole thing in. If there are multiple branches, it will create an environment for each branch, and then that's where it gets the data it needs to compile a catalog for a node. So like here you can see that there's that node. It's just got two nodes. One of them says a package installation. Oops, shouldn't have that I in there. Package installation, and you can have multiple packages. And the other one says, hey, call the class Apache, which would use that module, and default vhost is a variable in the Apache module that allows you to kind of create a default vhost. It's port 80, listens on any address that the node has. The manifest under the module is where you actually find the code. So you can see in this one, you've got all of those things. Now params is where the parameters are, what parameters it can be managed, and then the init is where the class is. That's how it always knows to look at an init under the manifest, under the module name. So if you go class Apache, looks under modules, Apache, manifest, init. And that's where it's going to find that class. Then it will build a catalog for that particular node that says, hey, you're supposed to use this class Apache to install these configuration items, these packages, these services. That node will do those things only. So the agents only get the catalog items that they need. So the server has an idea of all the environments, all the stuff that could be passed in a catalog, but each node only gets the catalog that they need. So like the catalog for that node right there, yeah, it's just going to be install 2 packages. That's all it's going to get. It'll get some additional Ruby items that it needs to provide, apt, that kind of stuff. But it'll only get the parts of the catalog that it needs to do its items.
So in order, in order for the agent to run and pick up the package from the server, it has to be able to run Ruby?
So the Puppet agent is Ruby. It's running Ruby to do its configuration items. So all of the helpers, like the providers, so apt, if it was going to use apt, it would have an apt provider, so it knows how to tell apt to go out and update, go out and get a package from the repositories, maybe create a new apt source, so they can go out and get new packages.
But the parallel is, so like in Ansible, you have to have Python installed on the
Right.
target. So on the targets here, they need some kind of Ruby,
They need the Puppet agent, which includes Ruby.
which includes it.
So
you don't
it's
have
going to have
install it all.
it's going to have the Ruby it needs. You're not going to install it all.
Okay.
You're going to say install the Puppet agent, and it's going to have what it needs.
Okay. So it has enough interpreter built in.
Right. It has enough of a Ruby interpreter built in that it knows how to interpret what it gets from the catalog.
Okay.
But you can see that as soon as you start getting more than a couple of modules, well, it gets unwieldy. I got to deal with this whole list of modules that I'm using. So that's why I say it can get a little unwieldy and a little unmanageable at that scale.
And the Hira can then be used to fill in the data sections.
Right.
So you put in what meta tags, and then the Hira will fill them in on a per target basis.
Right. So my data is in here, and in common YAML, I said, if you call the NTP class, there is a parameter in there that's called servers. It will know to fill that in with the NTP servers from this common.yaml file. So when you call the NTP class, I think I put it in site, class NTP, you can either pass it directly, like I did there, or you can just, oops, I guess I didn't comment it. You can just do the class and let Hira pass those server variables in. So see how this is the class NTP with servers? Well, that's that same YAML, NTP : servers. So this defines it for the NTP class, a parameter named servers, and it's going to be a list of items. So that's kind of how that Hira gets into the classes. You have to define those variables in the parameters of that class, but then it will look if it doesn't have defaults, or if it finds those in its Hira lookups, it will insert them instead of whatever's been defined as a default. If you have an undefined variable in the class, so let's say you say, hey, you need a server, undefined. If you don't pass it in a variable either at the class call or through Hira, it will blow up and go, hey, you didn't define a server, I can't complete, you undefined it. You gotta pass me one of those. So that's how that Hira is it's expecting to be called in a class, could be subclasses. So like could be NTP server : host name. However they've defined those modules. So like in a profile, some of our, we have a profile, we have a logger, and that logger also has a server name. So you'd have profile : logger : server. And you'd pass it whatever server name it needed.
So how do you share code between environments? Because it seems like it's very separate.
Each branch is going to be a separate environment.
Right?
So again, that's this one repository environment. Every branch I create, the Puppet server, you either tell it to get all the repositories directly, or you can have a webhook. So like if you push to Git goes out and says, hey, go ahead and pull all your code in. And it will go, okay, what branches do you have? Create a new environment. That's a new branch. So this single repository, that's how it deals with environments. Every branch is a new environment. So if you want to pull in a new Apache module, you have to create a new branch, copy the new Apache stuff into it, and then push it back up to your version control, and then Puppet either is told to, could be a cron job that runs to go out and get it, or it could be a webhook from Git that says, hey, if something's been pushed, a new branch is created, tell Puppet to go ahead and pull new code.
And Puppet handles distributing it to all the different branches?
So all the branches exist on the Puppet server. Every node only ever runs on one branch at a time. The node can only be in one environment at a time. You tell the node that you want it to be in a different environment. It goes out, tells the server, hey, I need a catalog. I'm in this environment. My node name is. It creates a catalog for that environment, for that node, and sends it to the node.
Can you manage like your data? Can you manage your data outside of the branch?
No.
That
No.
seems super
Well,
janky to me.
So you can have data that lives outside the branch, but why would you?
Well, so what I'm thinking is if I think of promoting my stuff through the environments, right? So I'm adding, Elasticsearch, right? So I've got some Puppet configuration for Elasticsearch, and I start off with that in a test environment, and then I want to promote that through different environments. I don't want to have to copy and paste that to a new branch, right? I want to be able to say, okay, merge this into this branch,
Right.
but have different data,
So
right?
you would cherry pick
Okay.
and then merge your cherry pick into the production. There are ways to do data, but it's kind of frowned upon because environments should have associated data with it. But you
Right.
could do lookups. Like if you're saying that my production environment
Right.
has this
Well,
domain.
That's what I was thinking about too. Yeah.
If my production environment has this domain, those can be looked up because the agent knows what domain it's in. And so you can fill it in based on the facts that agent knows about itself. It could say, hey, well, my subnets for networking is this, my domain is this. You can even tell the agents to be in a location. So you can create custom facts that agents are in locations. So your agents that are production agents will tell the server, I'm a production agent. It's going to get the production lookup.
Okay.
So there are some ways to manage that, promoting it in. You're kind of stuck with that data is all in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is that you would not promote the data, you would have separate data. So you would have that be in an environment. So like where I have nodes here, when I show you the R10K, I've actually created some separate areas. So
I had a question about the environment.
Mhm.
Are we talking about like the application being an environment? Are we talking like Windows versus Linux versus Debian versus?
No, staging versus production versus test.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about environments.
Okay.
Not the operating system environment, but the environment that those endpoints are supposed to run in. The production environment, the staging environment, the test environment. I could have a Windows AD in the test environment, one in the staging, one in the... So that's what we mean when we talk about the environments.
That makes sense with what you
Yeah, it's the actual production versus staging or testing environments. Let me figure out how to go back to my
Is it the one?
slideshow. There we go. Start from current slide. So R10K is sort of the bigger brother. It used to be a module or a gem you had to install separately. Now it's just, I want to activate R10K. It does it. Each module is a separate repository. Puppet knows where to find them. It will pull them in as necessary for each environment. That allows you to run multiple versions of each module. If they're tagged, you can go with a tag. You can tell it to use a commit hash. It will go to that commit hash. That's that version it will use. You could go to a branch on that repository. So you could have a profile branch that's production, but the role branch that's testing. So R10K allows you to do that, and then it gives you the opportunity to update those modules directly from upstream. Hey, go ahead and pull what's next in there. If you're set to a tag, even though you pulled in all new stuff into your repository for the module, you wouldn't update it. Your Puppet wouldn't use it because you've set a tag. That's the version it's going to use. It is more complicated to understand because you have to have an R10K for the manifest that defines the nodes and the data. Then it also has a Puppet file that tells it where to find all the other stuff. It does give you multiple repositories to manage. So like when you're editing code, if you're like me, I have like 5 Visual Studio windows open at a time because I have my R10K environment open, I have my profile repository open, I have my role repository open, and I have a module if I'm having to deal with editing a module open. But that gives me the opportunity to manage each of those individually. So I can make changes to the role that would never be applied to anything else until I specifically told Puppet, okay, I want you to use this version of that role repository. You do have to track versions of all your modules, whether that's I want to use the master branch or a production branch or a specific tag. So you kind of have to know where you're at. And when you merge like from a branch of R10K into the production branch, you have to make sure that your Puppet file doesn't override it with whatever you were using to test. So like if I open up a testing R10K branch where I'm editing a profile, I change that in the Puppet file for that environment. But then when I merge that profile into the production profiles, I need to make sure I change it in the Puppet file or do a cherry pick before I move those changes from R10K into production. So it can be a little more complicated with the whole. So let me pull up an R10K. So you can see it's a lot easier to look at. That's the R10K environment. So you've got your manifest with define the nodes. You've got an environment configuration, which could have some environment configuration. And then the big thing is this Puppet file. You can include Puppet Forge modules, and those can be tagged with particular details. Let me get that window out. You could do a module with a branch for the reference, or you could do a reference that's a tag. So any of those items will work, or even a commit hash will work as a tag. And that allows you to, just like that, well, I'm just going straight to them, but I'm only using that tag. So no matter how much they opt, but when Puppet goes to pull it, it'll pull that tag in. That's what it'll build the environment with. So that one is directly to upstream. The profile, that's kind of a local one. So that'd be a Git local. So it'd be my local Git repository would hold that profile. And then you could also do that Puppet Forge. Just go directly to Puppet Forge. Puppet knows that if you want to go to Puppet Labs and get the Apache module, it's going to go to Puppet Forge to get the Puppet Labs Apache module. Again, the data. So this is where you can kind of change where you're doing it. So you can have a site, and each node can know what site it's in, and it can get site YAML. So whether you're on the East Coast, West Coast, staging, production, you can also split it up by network. So if one subnet is your testing and one subnet is your development, you can split it up like that. So you can have your data in there as well. And then you can have the node, which you can have a default. So if node doesn't find any other details, it'll get the stuff from that, or node specific. And then this hierarchy YAML is where it defines the hierarchy of the YAML, what order it's going to look in. So whether node is more important than common, normally people say node's most important, so if you got something in your node, that's the one you use, otherwise we use the site. If you don't see anything in site, you go to common. If you don't see anything in common, you go to global. Kind of splits it up like that. I've got Bolt already installed. Let's see if I remember how to run these, which I may not. I want to copy a file. See, I don't run Bolt enough. Where's my file? There we go, file upload, source destination. See, that's pretty easy. And I'm going to copy the nodes.
Oop, leave.
If I can type, now this is, I'm pulling them from a file.
Or a fly.
Or a fly, yeah, see? I'm terrible like that. So this will pull them from the host.txt file. It's just a list of the hosts that I want to run. And I probably should have. It may not work. I don't know if I did that right, but. Whoops. There we go. Let me do this one. Then I have to do now this should copy an etc host file to those two nodes. Let's see. Like I said, I don't use Puppet Bolt very often. It's supposed to run like Ansible, where you tell it what nodes to run against.
Is there a comma between?
Yeah, I think there is.
Oh, between the nodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's supposed to be a comma between the nodes. Yeah. That's okay. I'll run it again. Yeah, there is supposed to be a comma between those nodes. See if that runs quicker. Make sure they're still running. Oh, are you kidding me? No, I timed them out. That would be why. Sorry, see, that's why you, whoops, wrong one.
It's free servers.
Yeah, that's what you get for free servers, right? Says they're ready. Yeah. Timed out on, yeah, that's what it is. I timed out on flipping, yeah, the Wi-Fi networks. Ah, you're killing me. That's what I get for using the, and then this thing had, look at that. Why their thing is offset, I'll never know, but.
All right, I see you again.
Let's see if I, all right. Come on. Guess I never had a.
Oh, I was looking for your known host.
Yeah. Yeah, looking for the known host file. Yeah, no, you got to log into them once. This will give me Puppet and a single node I can run. Ugh. All right. Come on. Whoops. That's what I want to do.
So you were just trying to get past the first time prompt?
Yeah, so if it expects to be able to verify that you trust that certificate. So it won't go out, and if the host certificate's changed, it'll be like, nope. So
You can't do the OpenSSH file and skip strict, whatever.
yeah, I probably could have, but I didn't, so it's easier just to do it once. And
Alright.
yeah, I could have, but
I was gonna say it's probably just a parameter you can pass to.
yeah,
to
I'm
the-
sure there is a host key check and don't bother, but
So you're actually just sending the host file from
from my Bolt server,
your Bolt
from my Bolt workstation
to those
two servers. And you can have a list, so you can have a host file, but I added IPs to it so it doesn't really look light. It should just be a list of the host names you want to connect to in a text file, and you can pass it in hosts or nodes at whatever the file name is. So like in this case, it would be or whatever that is. So then you pass it a file name, it knows that it'll go through, each line should be a new host name. So now if we go to Puppet, we should be able to, or actually if we go to 2C, it should know how to get to Puppet. Yep, you open a new shell. So now this would be my remote node, and as I said, the agent would normally be running in the background, but I'm going to force it to run from the node. And that's just with a test flag, and there's a short version. You can also pass the environment you want it to run in. And then also you can pass it a no-op. Now it should, yeah, apparently I didn't install Puppet on this one.
This isn't really anything to do with the prior demonstration of
Of Bolt. Yeah, Bolt is just that one shot. I want to load that file. So I was using it to load that file. And then I don't have any tasks.
There's no relationship from this to that?
No.
Okay.
No, I was just using that to load the host file.
Okay. Wanted to make sure it wasn't putting down a package that you needed to run again.
No,
Okay.
that was just to add that host file.
All right.
Is there some relationship between Bolt and Puppet though? I mean, does Bolt use
The tasks and what did I say the other thing was? But the groups of tasks are written in Puppet
Okay.
or YAML. So those are written in Puppet or YAML. Yeah, okay.
What you were saying though, Bolt is really for those just one-time.
Well, it's
Type
for
things.
non-recurring.
Right, and so my assumption would be unless you are being very clever in what commands you're giving it, like it's not doing any checking that, if you did like an apt get install, it's not going to, through Bolt, if you just tell it this is the command to run, it's not going to say, oh, you're trying to do an apt installation,
Right.
so I'm going to see if it's already installed and not do it if it,
Right.
yeah. I remember Chef having something you could do kind of like that, yeah, where you could basically leverage its knowledge of what hosts there were and send an SSH command to them all. And so if there was like a one-off type thing where it's just, I want to run this command against all these things, it's a command in the context of it knows what roles things have and where they are and how to connect to them. So you're leveraging some of the infrastructure, but yeah, beyond that, it was just dumb commands.
So Bolt could probably run something against everything in an environment or.
Yeah.
So one of the things that some people do is run their initial configuration with an Ansible push. They'll do package installations, they'll do copy down files with it, and then they'll use Puppet to manage the configuration.
So they don't use Bolt to do that initial thing.
Well,
Seems like Bolt does something similar.
Bolt is relatively new,
Okay.
and it's a way to kind of translate your knowledge of Puppet over to that one shot. Well, we changed, we want to add these keys to everything, even though we don't want them in Puppet or something.
Seems like it's Puppet's answer to Ansible.
It is. It's an Ansible-ish version of Puppet. So you can use the same Puppet language. Are you kidding me? All right, well, let's run that against a different node.
We have Salt do one-off commands all the time to like a subset of our Salt nodes.
And what runtime requirements does Salt have? I know we're talking about this having like a self-packaged Ruby version with it. Is Salt using Ruby? Is it
Python.
Python? Okay.
And it does, even for those one-offs, require an agent, a Salt agent
Okay. Interesting.
called Minions.
Minions. Seems like somebody else was calling something minions. I don't think it was Salt. There's something where they changed a name because
Yeah, you can't call them.
nobody wants to call things slaves anymore. Which I
Let's see
can
if I can
appreciate.
Puppet on this one.
I can
So
appreciate.
no, it basically tells you to do a dry
Sensible.
run, tell me what it changed, and then I'll make a decision as to whether I want to run it without the no-op. By default, it runs against a server called Puppet. If it doesn't know where that is, it'll fail because it won't know how to get to it. But you can pass a server description and use any server. Yeah, well, let's see if it's running. Let's see.
It's not trusting yourself.
Well, I'm going to generate a new server.
It's not a trustworthy guy.
It doesn't actually have a cert. It's a problem.
Saying you already have a CA cert. So
I should. Oops.
if you would really like to replace your CA,
Huh. Well, let's replace my CA.
please delete existing files first.
Oh, I know why. You gotta be rude for this. Sorry.
Okay.
Maybe you don't need to make a new CA?
No. So those are the ones that I've already signed. 1C is the actual lab server. You can see it's got some alternate names to it for Puppet and my lab server. This one never runs, so couldn't fetch from. Oh. So this means that I already have it on here.
These are the public keys on the server side?
Yeah, this is how it knows that Joe Ryan 3C is the right one, but it generated a new certificate. Why, I don't know, probably because of these lab servers. It generated a new certificate, and so I have to remove the old one. The server will go, I don't have one for you, and then it'll wait for me to sign it. So revoke and clean it. I don't know, maybe that's
So this is sending up the new cert into the,
right. It should be sending it to the server. If it doesn't have a certificate, it'll generate it. It'll send it to the server. The server will say, yeah, I don't have you on there, so it'll cause it to fail. You could do a wait force to give you time to get to the Puppet server and sign it, and then it'll continue on. So it'll do a pause and kind of wait for the server to go, yeah, I got your certificate.
so when you have to literally sign it on the server side?
Yep.
And then it sends it back down?
Yep. So you do have to send it on the server side. So it says it's not been signed yet.
Before you actually sign it, is there a way to inspect it to see that you
Yeah,
see
so-
something that's not signed?
Sure, you can do this list, and you can either list all or you can list a cert safe name, and you can say, let's see, where's that requested certificates? So it gives you requested certificates, the top one.
So it's because you ran it and it didn't exist, now it shows up in your,
And
somebody said.
Right,
this
somebody
is the
said they
certificate.
wanted to get a certificate. So you can see we've got one requested certificate. That's an agent that's tried to connect, and the server went, nope, got to sign you first. The other ones are signed certificates, so those are agents that should be able to connect.
Is this in a database or some text file somewhere?
It's part of Puppet's, I think they're actually maintained in files, but I wouldn't swear as to where Puppet's storing them. So Puppet stores those certificates, whether it's in a database or just a flat file, I don't know. Could just be a flat file, like your known host file on a Linux server.
There's been no problem with like, too many people coming in at once and doing different things?
No.
So it's like,
So
say, for instance, like if a bunch of guys all pounded.
1,000 nodes try to
1,000
do
nodes
their
came in
agent.
at once.
Once you get to a
corrupt
certain
this
level, well, it won't corrupt the certificates. Because each certificate is an item, it's a single request. Hey, this is my certificate, and the server goes, nope. Once you get into a larger scale, like thousands of nodes, you'd start to have a primary master and then subservient ones that would actually answer catalog requests, but they get the catalogs. So your main server would only get, however many sub-servers you have
So
requests.
I deal with 40,000 endpoints.
Yeah, so you would set up multiple Puppet masters, and then you'd only have a subset of nodes connecting to each one. That's above my scaling, and so I haven't done a lot of research into the scaling on that. But there's a way to have a primary Puppet master and then slave nodes, so that the slave nodes will actually answer the vast majority of the requests. To kind of split, that 40,000 up into more manageable chunks. One server is enough to go up to some large number, and depending on how often they need to run. And the agents kind of randomize how often they run. Each agent. Most people don't run them every 30 minutes. We do, because the developers do changes in Puppet, and then they expect them to just get applied quickly. They'd like us to run it every 5 minutes, but that sort of takes a lot of processing power. So normally most people would do 2 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours. You can adjust that to kind of slow that rate as well. I think that there's a back off. If the server says I'm busy, that the agents will back off, because they do a pretty good scaling. You can easily do 40,000 nodes in an environment. You might need some slave servers, but that's how they solve that. scaling issue up to that many nodes is you'd have slave servers that would answer subsets of each nodes. So sign the certificate. Sign the certificate, and now the agent will actually run. And since I said no op, it will actually, oops, I was trying to increase how big that was. Since I'm running it no op, it'll actually just tell you what's gonna change or what it was gonna do. I'd restart this service, I'd install this package, I'd, load this file because it should be present, but it's absent. So it'll tell you what it's gonna do, but it won't actually do anything. To include the environment you pass it. So if you want to test against an environment, but not actually make any changes, you can do no op with an environment. It'll tell you what would change based on that environment, but it won't even change its configuration to run against that environment, because you told it to do no operations. So you see it uses that configured environment, gets its facts, so it knows what its facts. You can see I had a facts change there. Apparently I didn't do anything except create the state file YAML. But let's try and run against a different environment. Do I have any environments on there? Yeah. I guess that's the only one I got. Oh. I think I have a demo environment, but I could be full of it.
It was kind of subtle there, but I do think it's pretty cool, when you think about it from the perspective, in particular of having stuff behind a firewall or something like that, even the node registration was a, client initiated thing.
It is, and that's one of them is, you can have your server in a subset or a segregated domain, and the clients can access it. And then, like I said, both the server and the client have to agree that that's a valid certificate. Do I have a configured environment demo? Well, it might fail because the catalog doesn't exist. See, there you go. I have a demo environment, apparently. So you see, all of these things are Puppet cache library functions. So it's getting all its Ruby functions that it needs to run against that environment. Because it is a new environment as far as the Puppet catalog is concerned. Even though it might have some similarity to the production environment, it's a completely different environment. So that there isn't any bleed through, it keeps them separate.
So the facts, those are related to the client
To the node.
right now.
Right, its current state has all the facts. And I'll show you what facts it's got by default, and you can create custom facts. So anything that you can kind of capture from that node, you can get a fact on. And it gets added to the facts. And you can, if you have the Puppet DB installed, you can actually look at those facts on a site-wide level.
You're saying site-wide, so you could have like for one node.
Yeah, okay, and I had some failed dependencies from my Apache host. What are my failed dependencies on there? HTTPD. Okay. Yeah, so it's not actually got permission to run, because so the agent runs under the user puppet. It's got to have the ability to execute as root. So it has to have privileged access to run those packages. Guess I don't check as much as I'd like to.
Is this where you were saying doing like Ansible to set it up?
Yeah.
You could set it up so that the permissions on the user was right?
Right, and
like
it may be how I've configured
push out a
that Puppet
sudoers
server.
file or something.
Right.
Or use both?
Yeah, or use like what I do at home is I have a seed file for Debian that loads all those things ahead of time, installs the Puppet agent. So all I do is get on the node and go, all right, Puppet agent -t. tell it which server to go to, and you can even add that into its configuration file. So I do a lot of that as part of the pre-seed in Linux environment, but you could use Ansible to push that one-time thing out that has to be done that once, and then Puppet can manage it all. So factor is how you can get the node's information, and it is a JSON blob. Really? I thought it was factor. Let's see what it says.
Something's.
That's what it is on. Oh, so yeah, it is there. Just don't ask me why my less didn't work. But it is a JSON blob. Oh, I just didn't let it go long enough, I guess. So it's JSON. You can see it's got versions of things. Got your disks, how big they are. It's got BIOS information. It's got chassis, some metadata, any events that you're tracking, host names. You can see that host name isn't the same as my host name. So that stuff can be a bit odd. It's got the network details, subnets, profile, version to factor, identity information, what kernel, memory, any mount points that it's got.
Is that valid JSON? Because the equals greater than, doesn't it?
It might not be valid JSON. I said it's JSON-like.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not valid JSON, it's more a Ruby hash. So it is a Ruby hash, but you could parse it similar that you parse a JSON. It's a Ruby hash as opposed to a JSON object. So yeah, that hash rocket is the Ruby hash syntax, key value. That's how they designate the key value, is with that hash rocket. So really, there's a lot you can pull out of your facts and base things on. So netmasks, OS.
So these are standard named things.
Yeah, those are the standard facts that everything will have. So that's why a lot of modules will be compatible with multiple Linux distributions, and they'll look for OS family, Debian, Red Hat. Okay, forget what the OS name is, but like Ubuntu versus Debian. And then you can actually look at OS major release version. And so you can say, well, if it's 8 and below, you use this package name, 9 and above, you use this package name. So it can get distinguished based on those facts as to, okay, you need to be able to do different things for different operating systems.
Where did those facts come from?
Every node collects its own facts.
So it's part of the agent sending up data?
Right, it's the agent tells the server what it's got. Right, well, it's part of when it runs. So every time the agent runs a Puppet run, it collects its facts, and part of its run will be to process those back to the server.
So where are you getting this one from?
That one is actually on the endpoint node.
Right, so it actually dumps it to a file also?
Well, no, but you can run it and get the active, you can tell it, I want facts now. It's actually pulling the real-time facts for it.
Okay.
That's why it takes a little bit to run. The cache facts would be on the server. That's what you're looking at, is the facts from the last Puppet run. Whereas if you go to an endpoint, then you can actually get the current facts for that endpoint. And that's what I'm pulling here. Well, that was fun. The last thing I've got is, clear that out. There's a number of resources out there for it. So all the Puppet things, you can get their free web-based training at learn.puppet. Their docs are really pretty good. When I'm at work, that's pretty much what I use for having to figure anything out, is on their doc site. Gary Larizza's blog, it's crap Gary says, and he's got a lot of blog posts on using Puppet in various environments, scaling to tens of thousands of nodes, and some of the considerations with each of them. Puppet Bolt, they have a hands-on lab. And then if you're interested in the Puppet server part, you can use their Learning VM, which is basically like a choose-your-own-adventure planned event. It gives you challenges to reach through, and then each phase is something else that you're learning about. So It's just an OVA. You run it, and then it's actually got a, hey, what's my next task? Oh, learn how to create a module. Okay. So, I mean, it's a pretty easy way to get in there and start figuring out without destroying your own infrastructure or having to build up a big infrastructure as they're learning VM. They will probably do a sales call to you, but you know, you can blow them off. They're not too bad about, I'm just looking at to learn, you know.
Yeah, I think I actually registered. I never ran it, but I did do the registration. I don't
not
think I
bad.
ever really got bothered that much.
No, I mean, they'll call you once
Yeah.
or email you or, you know.
Yeah, well, actually, I think I was already in their system because there were some white papers that I downloaded a long time
Same
ago.
thing, you know.
They had some stuff around Nginx or something.
But it really does walk you through, you know, step by step about how to use it in an operational context as opposed to setting up the server part. Because that can be a process in itself, because you do want that Puppet DB. It says optional, but realistically, it's not optional. You kind of want it. You want to be able to go look and say, okay, for this environment, what is the state of all my nodes? So one of the first things I do is I look at each of the environments, and it gives you a nice little snapshot of these are the failed nodes, these are the nodes that have reported in, and these are the ones that I haven't seen lately. And then it'll actually allow you to dig down and see when was it last run. Well, what were the results of the last run? So it'll log all the entries of what it tried to do or what it did do on that Puppet DB, and you can pull those out. It's configurable as to how long you maintain them, whether that be, you know, I want 7 days of reports or 1 day of reports or forever. So, any questions other than that?
And that's all on the learning VM?
The learning VM is really the writing the manifest modules and using Hydra. It's the operational part of it. So you don't have to have your own, you know, you're not running a Puppet server, you're not configuring one, you're just doing the little steps that you would need to do to create a manifest against a node. Use a manifest to include a module, pass hybrid data to that module to configure it, that kind of stuff. It's more the day-to-day running the code as opposed to installing the server.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Anybody interested in more detail on Bolt in the fall? I'm willing to come and figure that out because I think I'm probably going to use it for some of my personal configuration stuff. So
Yeah, it'd definitely be worth at least having you come back and just talk about what you've learned, you know, what your experience is over time.
So, all right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.